Hello everyone, welcome to another VWO webinar. My name is Utkarsh Rai and I take up growth marketing initiatives at VWO. I will be moderating today's session. For any question, you can reach out to me on Twitter with today's hashtag AskVWO. You can also ask questions using the GoToWebinar questions widget to ask us anything during the session. We'll take them up at the end of the session. For today's session, we are excited to host marketing rockstar Mr. David Farme, who heads marketing for HubSpot for the Southeast Asian region. Joining him for the session, we have Anmol Oberoi from VWO Marketing and Mr. Sandeep Singh, who heads program management at VWO. We welcome you guys. In this session, we are gearing up for GDPR, which is just around the corner. So are you guys ready? Let's begin. I will request David to take it over from here. David, over to you.
Sounds good. All right. So welcome, everybody. And we're here to talk about GDPR, which I think for a lot of people is this very big, scary topic. You know, it's this legislation, this law. It sounds very, very official. And it's like lawyers are going to come to you and then fine you. I think that's what a lot of the press about GDPR is right now. But I think at HubSpot, our approach is really to view GDPR as an opportunity. It is realizing that the world today, how people think about digital marketing and how they give their data online to all these businesses, that's really changing. And GDPR is a reflection of this change. And so when we did some research around how consumers think about GDPR, we were not surprised to see stats like this. You know, 59% of consumers would ask a company to delete their records. In the world we live in today, let's call that the pre-GDPR world, think about it. Would you even know how to do this? A lot of companies, they're very good at capturing information, about getting information from consumers and visitors, but they don't have a way to delete people's records. But in a post-GDPR world, you know, May 25th and beyond, if you want to be GDPR compliant, this is something you're going to need to know how to do. And realize that almost 60% of consumers, at least in the EU, this is something that they're going to be looking to be able to do. This is something that they are expecting. And for business owners, it's important for them to realize that this is something that's on the horizon and view it as an opportunity. So only 36% of business leaders and marketers have heard of GDPR, and this is going to be a huge piece of legislation and regulation. It technically only applies to businesses who do business in the EU, but really that affects everybody. As long as you have customers or visitors or leads that are in the EU, you're going to be affected by this, and it's an opportunity for you to be compliant. It's an opportunity for you to differentiate yourself from the competition. So think about that as you go forward. And I think a big opportunity is realizing that, you know, GDPR, one of the things that's going to be more difficult and really against regulation is things like cold emails, cold prospecting. That's going to be less and less of a channel. So it's important for you to think about SEO. This is certainly what a lot of people that we surveyed are going to be thinking about. How do people do research now? How do customers do research now? A lot of that starts with Googling something or going on search. And so realizing that it's important that you have an SEO strategy. At HubSpot, certainly, this is something we've been talking a long time about, you know, inbound, capturing people when they're on their buyer's journey, capturing them when they're Googling something as opposed to interrupting them. It's really about attracting people to your business as opposed to interrupting them or getting in front of the face with interruptive tactics. So more and more companies who are going to be leaning into GDPR, they're going to be thinking about SEO, and that's going to be more and more important as we go towards the future. All right. Next up, we'll hand it over back to the guys at VWO.
Thanks, David, for those insights. They were really, really helpful about the stats, and you know, some of them do come as a surprise to most of the marketers around the world. My name is Anmol, and I take care of marketing at VWO. I will talk a little bit about GDPR in practice, and when I say we will discuss GDPR in practice, what I mean is I will help marketers understand what are the 5 or the 10 things they should be doing on ground to become GDPR compliant, only from a marketing perspective. And I hope you guys find this useful. So first up, you know, before actually jumping into introducing GDPR from a marketing perspective, I would like to take a step back and, you know, talk a little bit about what exactly is GDPR. Although I'm I'm assuming that most of us are aware, but just to give you guys a brief, GDPR talks about, data subjects and the rights of data subjects. So basically, every data subject has multiple rights and principles. And the most important rights are that they have the right to be forgotten, the right to be informed. At the same time, GDPR talks about data breach reporting. So in case of a data breach, all the data subjects have a right to be informed within 72 hours of a data breach. And one question that I've been hearing since the time we started working on GDPR is GDPR applicable only to European companies, or is it applicable worldwide? To give you guys some perspective here, GDPR is applicable worldwide. And the funny thing here is that it also means that if a European data subject is in the US, then the GDPR law applies to him as well. So it does not matter as to what's his location. As long as he falls under the European Union, the GDPR law applies to them. And I'm sure you guys have heard of this, but the penalties are up to 20 million euros or 4% of the annual worldwide revenue. So the numbers and the stakes are really, really high. And that's why it's very important why you need to be GDPR compliant. And that's exactly what David spoke about, right? It's coming like a big law, and everybody's really scared about it. So let me just throw some light upon data protection principles. Although I will not dive deeper into these, I will dive deeper into operational aspects of GDPR. But just before we get there, GDPR addresses 6 principles. One is that everybody has the data needs to be fairly, lawfully, and transparently processed. It needs to be collected for specified and explicit purpose. At the same time, it needs to be relevant. What adequate and relevant means here is that you just need to collect data that you're going to use for some sort of processing. So basically take an approach. If you want to capture 10 attributes, ensure that you're using these 10 attributes in some sort of marketing processing. It does not, you can't really have, let's say, a 50 to 100 attributes and then just use 10 attributes. That's what addresses data protection. And they need to be accurate and up to date. What that means is that if you have my email address from Wingify, which is anmol.obro@wingify.com, then it needs to be up to date in terms of what's my designation, what is my location. You can't really have inaccurate data. And data subject needs to be identified only for as long as it is necessary. And of course, data needs to be secure. That's the underlying principle of GDPR, that all the data needs to be secure for general public. The most important changes which GDPR brings along are the rights. So as a data subject, right, if one of you belong to the European Union and you use, let's say, for example, HubSpot or VWO, you have the right to be informed. And when I speak of being informed, you have the right to ask as to how we are processing your data. What sort of data do we have in our databases across the product, across marketing? You have the right to access that data. You can always ask for an export in an electronic format as to what sort of data we have about you. Erasure, which clearly means that we should be in a position to delete your data. That's what David addressed in his first slide. And then rectification. You can always look, once you've taken access to your data, then you can always request for rectification if you see some data fields are not accurate. At the same time, you can also restrict processing. Now, what this means is that, let's say, for example, I have 100,000 email IDs in my database, and it happens to be that one of your email addresses is one of those within the 100,000 database, 100,000 email IDs. You can always, restrict processing and tell me that I should not use your data as a subject during my, let's say, analytics or some sort of data processing that I'm doing internally. Portability is very simple. You can always, let's assume you move from a product A to product B, you can always ask for data access and port that data to a third vendor. At the same time, you have rights related to automated decision making and profiling. So these are the rights and principles that GDPR addresses. Now, quickly jumping down to operational aspects of GDPR. What are the things that you need to do, which I think would be the most helpful for marketers now? So consent, like David cleared in the beginning, that consent is the biggest thing that GDPR addresses. Again, I'll take a step back and address what exactly consent means here. Although this is a general marketing practice, but before actually sending any sort of marketing communication or any communication to a lead or a prospect, every company, in order to be GDPR compliant, needs to capture that consent. Now, what consent means is you basically need to ask all your prospects across all digital channels if they are okay to hear from you in the future. Now, what they want to hear about is something that they can always choose, and that's the preference manager, which I will address in the following sections. But this is how we addressed consent at VWO. We've placed a consent checkbox on all the VWO forms and on all digital properties to ensure that any new user or any new prospect that comes onto the VWO website is able to give us that consent that he's okay to stay in touch with us through digital communication. The other thing that GDPR also highlights is while you're asking people for consent, you should ensure that to take away that consent or to withdraw that consent is as easy as to give that consent. And that's what we are highlighting in the next line, that you may easily opt out of these by unsubscribing through the link provided in VWO's email communication. So these are two things that we are addressing on all our digital properties, and you could do the same by using HubSpot. HubSpot offers you a simple checkbox. By using HubSpot forms, you can always have a checkbox on your form by integrating it at the backend, and HubSpot will record it as a yes or no Boolean property at the backend, which is indicated right here. At the backend, HubSpot clearly mentions yes or a no, which is basically true or false for every lead or prospect who says that they are okay to hear about us, they are okay to hear from us in the future, or they are not okay to hear from us in the future. And HubSpot offers a capability to automatically ensure that anybody who has basically given you consent, you reach out to only them via email. You can set up workflows to ensure you're not reaching out to anybody who has given a consent no, because this is a Boolean property and it can easily be done by HubSpot. That's what we did at VWO. Coming down to the preference manager, which we spoke about initially, when somebody gives a consent to hear from you in the future, it might not always mean that if I'm giving you consent, I want to hear from you about everything related to VWO or everything that is happening within an organization. So what that means is that if at VWO, we have multiple forms of communication. Let's say we talk about, we want to share VWO blogs, we want to share VWO events or user surveys, then it might not always mean that a lead or a prospect always wants to hear about everything. So what HubSpot does is it offers you a preference manager where you can go and list down all the things or all the communication that you want to send to your leads, prospects, or customers, and give them an option to pick from these, because it always makes sense to let people pick about what they want to hear rather than letting them unsubscribe from all the communication altogether. Now, the communication preference or the preference manager here again has been built using HubSpot, because we use HubSpot at VWO. And again, how this works at the back end is, as soon as somebody, let's say, for example, clicks on events and unchecks user surveys, VWO blogs, and resources and best practices, HubSpot at the back end will record this value to ensure that anybody who has basically unchecked VWO blogs, resources, and best practices never hears from you about these. How this happens is every time you try to send an email to, let's say, a list of prospects, HubSpot always asks you what sort of email are you trying to send, and what sort of email is equivalent to the preference that the person has. So in case, even if a prospect who has not subscribed to events is in your list, HubSpot will ensure you're not sending them an events mail. So it makes your life a lot more easier from a GDPR perspective. Coming down to the withdrawal of consent, like we clearly pointed out, that GDPR asks you to withdraw consent as easily as it is given. So there are two ways a user can withdraw consent, although there are multiple ways, not just two, but from an email perspective or from a GDPR perspective, two ways that we have implemented it at VWO are: one is within the preference manager. So the preference manager offers an unsubscribe link. So anybody who does not want to hear at all from you can unsubscribe from here, and it can be centrally stored in HubSpot. At the same time, any email that goes out of HubSpot or the email marketing tool has an unsubscription link at the bottom, which ensures that if anybody wants to unsubscribe, they can easily unsubscribe from the email rather than coming to the preference center. So these are two ways in which people can withdraw consent, but they can also withdraw consent by reaching out to us via email, which basically falls into the bucket of the 8 rights that GDPR reaches out to you, which I will discuss in the following sections as to how you can address these 8 rights. And this is how, like I clearly mentioned, if somebody has opted out of a certain email, HubSpot will clearly mention that a user has opted out of a particular email, and it will store the value as yes or no, similar to how it will store the value for consent as yes or no. The other part where GDPR could be applicable is cookie consent. Any website or any product does save a lot of information within specific cookies, and this is another important aspect, because at most instances, website might be the first place where a user will interact with your website or with you. So in this case, you need to implement a cookie consent manager. Now there are many, let's say off-the-shelf cookie consent managers available in the market. TrustArc is one of them. OneTrust is one of them. But there are always options to build it in-house. Although I would recommend that TrustArc and OneTrust are big players, but we decided to build this in-house for multiple reasons. And I will show you how it flows internally, the workflow of the cookie consent manager that we built in-house. So what VWO did on their website is basically, we first, made a list of all the pixels or tags that we have on our website, and identified what sort of cookies are being generated with these tags. So let's say, for example, I have Google AdWords. Then Google AdWords is generating cookies on my website, and it's storing some sort of data. So I need to clearly let my users know that, I have Google AdWords or retargeting running on my website, which is generating cookies, and I have some sort of data stored about you. So in this case, what we did is we made a master list of all the cookies that are being generated, categorized them into, let's say, required cookies, advertising cookies, and functional cookies. Required cookies are basically cookies that no one can opt out of, because these are cookies that are needed for basic functionality of the website. Once we did that, we started building an in-house cookie consent manager. And we basically, once we had categorized this, when we built the cookie consent manager, we gave people options to opt into different sort of cookies. So if somebody did not want to hear from us via ads or retargeting, he would not opt into the advertisement cookies. And as soon as the person gives us consent for, let's say, functional cookies, which would be someone like an Intercom or HubSpot, at the back end, our cookie consent manager would give this logic into the GTM, and GTM would fire necessary tags for each and every user who has given consent. And this will be based on the cookies that were generated based on the consent that was given. In order to opt out, the messaging that we have given is people can always clear their browser cookies, and we will not generate any cookies in case someone wants to opt out of all of our cookies that are generated on the website. This is a very, very simple approach that we took in-house. And these are the things that we addressed in marketing from a GDPR perspective, apart from the rights. Now, coming down to the rights, the approach that we have taken internally is, as soon as although we have automated workflows at the backend, which are built again using HubSpot's internal workflow capability, as soon as a person, what you could do is you could build a simple landing page where you could have a drop-down menu where people request for, let's say, data access, data deletion, data rectification. And as soon as somebody requests, his email ID flows back into HubSpot. HubSpot recognizes this user and the data that is present around him and triggers a workflow in accordance with the request. So if it is a deletion one, you might have to do it manually as of now. And your internal team can get emails saying that somebody has, not somebody, in this case, the email ID, the specific user has requested for data deletion or data access, and people can take care of these requests. That's how we have taken care of the 8 rights for GDPR. And these are the only things that we felt we need to implement from a GDPR perspective, apart from data protection. So we are very, very particular about privacy and data protection and about the data that we have about our users, apart from other rights that GDPR asks for. Coming down to the marketing tips. So there are a lot of questions around what sort of marketing activities will get affected with reason being, when somebody shares their email address, when you scan somebody's email address on events, it's not necessarily a consent to reach out to them in the future. So in this case, one solution that we've been loudly thinking about but not really implemented at this point of time is every time somebody scans or you scan somebody's card on an event, you can basically ask them to also scan a QR code, which at the back end will, let's say, convert into a yes or no consent, and will ensure that when somebody gives a consent at events, it's in a yes or no format and it's stored in an electronic format. You can't really do that manually when you scan somebody's card at an event and you go back into your marketing automation tool and manually say yes or no. At the same time, GDPR also says that you need to have a clear electronic record with timestamp for consent, so that you are able to prove the consent, not just capture consent, but also prove consent. As clearly pointed out initially, that you should do away with things which are nice to have while collecting data and information, and just have information that you're going to use it or process in your day-to-day activities. The other aspect of GDPR which is going to get affected is, while most event organizers, what they do is they basically share their delegate lists. So one thing that they need to make sure is they stop sharing delegate lists until and unless somebody has really given them consent to hear about, let's assume that it's a marketing technology event and there are 1,000 attendees and 15 exhibitors. So an event organizer can't share the 1,000 attendees information with 15 exhibitors until and unless these 1,000 exhibitors have really, 1,000 attendees have really given consent that they want to hear about marketing technology, or they want to hear about, let's say, HR technology. This is one I have a very interesting example here. I recently attended Martech, and they had this done very, very well. So for every user, they had different barcodes where you were able to scan their interests. So for every user you scanned, you could also scan their interest using barcodes, and this would record electronically into an Excel sheet, which you could easily trigger Zapier and send it into HubSpot. One big question which is on the mind of many marketers is outbound marketing, and there are no clear answers to it as of today. But I think most people are going to take an approach where they will wait and see what happens, because outbound is directly reaching out to people via cold email. And again, so I'm not really sure as to how people can do it, but we at VWO are being very, very careful about outbound as an approach, and I'm sure bigger companies like HubSpot also are being very, very careful about that. So outbound marketing is something that you really, really need to be careful about in case you're doing that very actively. We will address different questions from a marketing perspective moving on. In case you have any questions, we have a Q&A session post the program management section, and I will hand it over to Sandeep, who heads program management at VWO and who basically enabled all the on-ground operations from marketing and product in GDPR. Sandeep, over to you.
Hello everyone. Thank you, Anmol and Dave. So what Anmol just told was a very interesting story, how we tackle GDPR on marketing side. In my presentation, I'll basically go a little broader and talk to you about how we addressed GDPR from a broader organizational perspective as a company-wide initiative and program. Speak of security and compliance as a broader ongoing initiative, and then GDPR as one of the mini programs within this broader picture. So our story of GDPR implementation actually goes back about 2 years, and that's when there was a time when we seriously started talking about GDPR as something that was coming up on horizon and something we had to carefully plan and implement for. But in all honesty, we started off with the ground level execution around 7 months back, and I'll walk you through the timeline a bit. And when we started about, hey, what exactly we should do from program management perspective, running it as a program, we thought, hey, we have to implement GDPR. Alongside, we also have to go for certain certifications that our customers had constantly been expecting us to have. And these were certifications like British Standards 10,012 and ISO 27001. So we thought we should tackle it in a single go. And instead of doing one-off projects which are not correlated to each other, let's have a framework in place, which basically would cover a lot of pieces from British Standards certification, ISO certification, as well as GDPR. And if you look at ISO and British Standards certifications, they actually have about 80% overlap with what GDPR is requiring. So they're not entirely different from GDPR in the first place. Also, one of the key objective of this program was to define and execute on security and compliance roadmap. And we now have about 2.5 to 3 years long roadmap for our security and compliance program. And GDPR and these two certifications are actually just first few phases in that ongoing journey. Also, we wanted to establish an ongoing process for people and tools, and basically general awareness within the company for security and compliance as an ongoing thing, not as a one-off thing which we once do and can wash our hands off. So at the core of it, when we decided to put together a team to execute it, we had Corp Security and Compliance Committee, which had direct buy-in from the CEO, and had our data protection officer, who was actually an expert within ISO domain, as well as British standards domain, and is now acting as our DPO. Myself as head of the program, and various functional heads from throughout the company. So head of sales, head of marketing, product, customer support, admin and IT, engineering, so on and so forth. So basically every single department across all of our product lines had some representation within that committee. And at ground level, we had corporate security and compliance execution teams, which comprised of, in majority cases, the lead was the head of that department. The team had several people from that department responsible for figuring out the processes, ground level changes they had to go through and implement those. And the whole committee, CSCC, actually met at least once a week to discuss progress, highlight risks, and mitigate them in a timely basis. So what I'm trying to highlight here is marketing was actually one of the pieces in this whole gamut, in this whole picture. And what Anmol just presented was marketing's take on how they implement it and work towards this common objective of security and compliance as a program with GDPR as an immediate target. There were other departments involved. And I'll come to why marketing cannot solve GDPR in isolation. It actually should be a company-wide initiative in a bit. So moving on. So just to recap our journey from the last 7 months or so, we were looking for a framework which we could use to implement, plan for and implement GDPR as well as corporate security and compliance. And we went for PDCA, which is actually a very widely accepted framework for projects like these, programs like these. The first phase was planning phase, in which we believe we started around end of October to early November timeframe, and we spent good 2 months on basically getting stakeholder buy-in, stakeholder awareness, doing gap analysis within different departments, putting together a data inventory. Data inventory is actually one of the most important documents you can put together towards GDPR compliance, which was basically capturing every single piece of data that we collect from our direct customers, their customers, and how we store it, what's our retention policy, current retention policy, and in many cases we didn't have any policy, which went into the gap analysis part we did. And then defining company policies around retention, gathering of data, also physical security, information security, and data privacy in general. Basically putting together statements from the top management around our commitment toward data privacy and security, and then putting together an implementation plan. CSCC, the Corporate Security and Compliance Committee, which I discussed in the previous slide, was established in this phase as well, and compliance as a program was launched. So after that, we went into execution mode, which has been going on for about 5 months now. And in that phase, whatever plan we had in the first 2 months was put to execution. So the presentation that Anmol covered around marketing changes, changing the websites, how we manage consent, how we retain data, delete data, and basically fulfill data subject rights within GDPR. All of those changes were made throughout our marketing stack, product stack, engineering stack, and all of the other departmental stacks that we had. We also appointed our data protection officer, and we went for, although we had a choice to appoint somebody on a part-time basis, we went for someone who was in-house, and there were actually some good reasons for doing that. Also, there were procedures in place around data subject rights. So a lot of the data subject rights fulfillment was automated, as was the case in case of marketing. In case of product, I would say around 60 to 70% of the flow is automated. So any of our customers, or in some cases their customers, can put in a request for deleting their data, for example. However, there are still some manual pieces, and putting together these procedures to tackle those manual cases in a timely manner was very, very important. Customer-facing policies. So we're actually revising our data protection policy, our privacy policy, and also putting together a data protection addendum, which we'll be hosting on our website, and we'll be sending into all of our existing and new customers for sign up. And also our internal awareness program happened within this time frame. The next phase is checking how well we did, and we're doing that. We're actually going through a number of internal and external audits to figure out if there are still existing gaps, and whatever gaps that come out of these internal and external audits, we fulfill them or bridge them within the ACT part of it. And it's an ongoing thing. So that's where the ongoing nature of security and compliance as an initiative, a program, company-wide program, comes into play. So that takes me to the most important and difficult bit, which is basically building a culture of privacy, data protection, and security within the company. And just because of the nature of our company, and I'm pretty sure you will have a very similar challenge. We are a very open culture in which we believe in convincing and educating people, or just sending them an email from the CEO and then expecting everybody to follow the guidelines. So as part of that, we actually invested lots and lots of time in building our awareness program, and we're just getting started. So some of the things that we did and worked out for us, and I'm hoping will work out for you as well, were things like conducting a lot of sessions, a lot of presentations around why data privacy matters, why GDPR is not a burden, why is it something you should care about, and how it's in direct alignment with our values of customer obsession and customer trust. So a number of things that you see on this slide, this is actually a presentation slide that we did, which was basically a commitment that whatever certifications and changes we were making, we're not doing it for the sake of it. We really wanted to bring a real change within the company. There are some of the posters that we have actually on practically every single wall in the office, a constant reminder to our employees why physical security, data protection, data privacy are everybody's responsibility, and they all have to pitch in. We conducted these quizzes in which we basically first coached people, and then we asked them some pointed questions around how they would act in certain situations. We ranked them, and then we gave away these funky GDPR-ready T-shirts. Here, our co-presenter Anmol is sporting one of those. So Anmol, by the way, was a real internal champion, and we actually leveraged popularity of these internal champions to basically sail the point across. So in a nutshell, if I were to summarize the key takeaways in 3 points. First and foremost, do not treat GDPR as a one-off project. Now, it may come up as a sort of an impractical thing, since we are only 25 days away from the GDPR. But I'm seriously hoping your organization has already thought about or already has a security and compliance program going. And then GDPR should be a natural extension of that program rather than a one-off thing that you just have to do and then wash your hands off it. And if you do not have a security and compliance program yet, you should start one. My serious advice to you, you should really start one. And obviously, GDPR is not just marketing. It's way beyond marketing. It impacts practically every single function and department within your company, and it should be treated as such. Second, a culture of privacy by default and by design is something you need to advocate throughout all levels within the company. And for this, you need to have stakeholder buy-in. It's not something that a single marketing manager or somebody who is very passionate about GDPR can do on his own. Top management has to buy into it and has to push it as a very high priority within the company for this to happen. And you have to have internal processes, procedures, awareness, and training sessions, as I just mentioned, all aligned towards this culture of privacy by default and design if you want to see some real change at the ground level. And third is, although British standards and ISO, these certifications they do not guarantee GDPR readiness, but they are seen as very close proxies to being GDPR ready. British Standards 10,012 certification in particular is in very close alignment with the data protection and privacy principles and data subject rights preached by GDPR. So if you cover those, these will be some very tangible steps towards people taking your GDPR readiness much more seriously. So with that, I'm gonna hand it over back to David. Dave, over to you.
Hey everybody, that was great. So for anybody who's trying to think about what a best practice GDPR setup looks like, I definitely recommend VWO and the guys at Wingify. So I've been chatting with a lot of companies about their GDPR setup, and guys, really, like, hats off. That's one of the best practice implementations and plans I've ever seen. So anybody who's looking to just copy a model, just do exactly what they're doing, guys. Everything about appointing an internal team that will allow you to have cross-functional influence in terms of any compliance projects that need to be undertaken. That's excellent. And then really having an internal champion or a set of internal champions to make sure that everybody takes it seriously, that it's not just this one-off project that you have to get it over and done with. Same thing we're doing with HubSpot. We're treating it like a product feature. You know, we're aligning everything like a product launch so that everybody's internally aware of what's happening, and then treating it as an ongoing thing that we're just going to be minding. So with that, happy to take any questions, and I think this is open to the Wingify folks as well. But if there's any questions, we're happy to chat.
That's great, David. I've started to get some questions already, but I'll be second and ask my own question. So with GDPR coming into effect, a lot of questions have been raised around referral marketing. as businesses invest a good budget in milking their advocate clients for growing their customer base. Even e-commerce firms offer heavy discounts on referring customers. Now, with the consent regulation coming into play, how we make the use of referral marketing as a channel? So maybe David, you can start off with, maybe then Anmol and everybody else will take that up.
Sure. So so before I give my perspective on this, just to be perfectly clear, I'm not a lawyer and I'm not like a GDPR authority on anything. I can just tell you guys how we think about things with regards to GDPR at HubSpot. And so the way we think about things like referral marketing is consent, like you said. It's making sure that when that person gives you an email address, that they know that the email address may be used for referral marketing or for affiliate marketing. So making sure that that is clearly messaged and that they can revoke that if they so choose. That is very important. So it doesn't remove the ability for you to do referral marketing or anything like that. Just making sure that you're being very upfront with that, and so consumers know what they're getting into.
Yeah, I think that's that's the gist of it. Again, as you can basically do any marketing practice as long as it's executed right. And if I had to share my 2 cents on ground about referral marketing, then what I would say is that if you had to execute it on ground and ensure you're continuously doing referral marketing and it's not impacted by GDPR, what you could do is basically the email that goes out on behalf of your friend who has referred you, right? Ensure that that email has a CTA, which is requesting for consent or which is requesting for future communication. So that will ensure that, in case you want to basically engage these leads that you've got through referral marketing, they have given you consent to hear from you in the future, and your relationship does not end just with that email. And that's exactly what we're trying to do at VWO, because we do depend on referral marketing. So we're making sure that any of the emails that go out because of any referrals, those email IDs, those emails are basically having a call to action, which will capture consent and take them to their preference manager so that they are able to select what they want to hear about it from us.
That's great. There's one question from Sean. Sean has a question that he's asking, what would you recommend businesses who haven't started preparing for GDPR? What could you recommend as a good starting point? I think Sandeep discussed a lot about operational bit of GDPR and everything. Apart from saying that you're screwed in a month, what else can you say?
Okay. So I think with only 25 days left to the GDPR deadline, I think the program management aspect or running GDPR as a sub-program within the broader security and compliance program thing that I spoke about may not be feasible. So I think you, at this point, if you haven't already started working on it, you should go for the lowest hanging fruits. In this case, I think I would be safe in assuming you may not have enough time to automate data subject rights fulfillment. So I think just go after the data subject rights, coach your team on why they are important, and have basically very lightweight process documents around how would you fulfill them manually in case there's a data subject access request that comes in, or even on an ongoing basis, how you will implement consent, how will you implement data retention, deletion, right to be forgotten, and so forth. Have like 5, 6, or even 10 bullet pointed list of how your team will be fulfilling those manually at this point. And that way you will be able to attack basically the heart of GDPR. And then eventually, as you have basically implemented those basic processes and have those in place, you can go for automation as a longer term solution.
And I would just add to that, in addition to the things that we've chatted about today, for those of you who, because I think every business is going to be in a different stage of readiness for GDPR. So if we have a lot of resources for GDPR at HubSpot. So if you just quickly Google HubSpot GDPR, you're going to find a lot of checklists there to help you benchmark where your compliance is and what you might have left to do. So just check that out.
Perfect. Maybe you can also check out VWO on GDPR. We have also done quite a bit on that bit. So yeah, another question, another that interesting question, which is coming from Nina's side. She's asking, will we need to put a consent box also on the comment section of a blog? This is interesting. David, maybe you can take that up first.
Sure. I think as long as, so if there is an intent for you to follow up with that person with like an automated sequence, then you will likely need to put a consent box. If you're just going to allow them to leave a comment on your blog but not follow up with them, then it is possible for you to not have a consent form. So the guidance around GDPR is not super solid in that it's covering every possible use case. And so the general purpose is, as long as you don't have a plan to continually send them follow-up emails or sequences or put them in a bunch of workflows, you're generally okay. What GDPR is trying to protect against is people getting put into like huge newsletters that they didn't ask for, or they're trying to opt out of things that they can't opt out of. So as long as you're steering clear of those general not best practices, that's something that you should be okay with. Would you guys have a different take on that?
Yeah, I mean, what David has said here is absolutely in line with GDPR requirements. Just to add one point there, this was a question even I had 7 months back when I was doing some sort of research on GDPR. And one approach, which again is a gray area for us, but one approach that companies like Acton have taken is they've covered this area in their privacy policies. So they've listed down comment section or social sharing or all of these things which are gray areas. They've covered these within their privacy policies, saying that these are, so let's assume in all cases your blog is being hosted on WordPress or something, so you can always cover it in your privacy policy, saying that the data protection lies with them in this case. And like David clearly mentioned, if you're not going to nurture them or engage them, then it's absolutely okay.
Awesome. So another question which we're getting from David is, it's a VWO specific question. He's asking, how will VWO roll out the cookie consent within the application? So maybe Sandeep or Anmol can take this up.
Yeah, I can take it up. Sandeep here. So within the app, we actually will be building provisions for our customers to basically build a cookie consent manager on their side. It will be done through API endpoints that will be made available. And actually, I would welcome, that was David, right? David, to actually reach out to our product management team, or we can reach out to you even for more details. We're actually still gathering requirements around what would be the best possible approach for our customers will be from technical standpoint as to what kind of API endpoints they would expect. Sorry, that was Daniel.
Great. Another question which is coming up from Rachel is, businesses invest in attending events with an expectation of building the sales and marketing pipeline. How does GDPR affect this playing field? How big players like HubSpot and VWO are addressing this issue? Is there a way to digitally capture consent? I think Anmol spoke a little bit about events and capturing this. Maybe he can discuss that.
We are also contemplating, and we are in the middle of figuring out how we want to handle this. But like clearly, there's a lot of literature around this that just scanning somebody at an event is not equivalent to a consent, or just receiving somebody's business cards, gathering business cards is not equivalent to a consent. So one thing that we internally are brainstorming with is if we can set up some sort of automation process which will ensure that as soon as somebody scans a QR code, their details go inside HubSpot and mark them as a yes or a no, which is equivalent to a consent as yes or no. That's what we are trying to do. But like I clearly mentioned, that events is a gray area, and we're not really clear as to how we want to reach out to people in the long run and capture their consent. Although at one of the most recent events that I attended, like I clearly mentioned, that they had barcodes, and you could scan those barcodes after scanning somebody. Let's say I scan XYZ person, then I can scan another barcode which will capture what sort of interest this person has. This person has interest in events of attended by VWO. This person has events, basically interest in VWO blogs or resources. But that again, does not boil down to electronic consent. So I'll be very candid here that we don't have a lot of clarity here, and we are also trying to figure out what we can do with it. David, in case you have any opinion here or any data points to share, then please feel free to.
I think you've captured it pretty well, and we're approaching it roughly the same way. A lot of the it's interesting that the working party for the GDPR, and that's the group within the EU regulatory body, they're still releasing guidance on a lot of these things. And so as marketers, it's important for us to stay up to date on the guidance they are releasing. But that's how generally we would approach it, and we're waiting for further information for more specifics to be really compliant.
Right.
Perfect. Actually, we are getting a lot of questions around GDPR, but I think keeping the time in mind, we'll take just one more question. This question comes from Tariq. He's asking that how cookie consent would work for mobile apps for new users and users already having the app. So maybe David, can you take that up first? He's basically asking how would consent work for mobile apps and for new users and for the users who are already on the app.
Sure. So for mobile websites, it would work the same way as if they were using a laptop or a desktop computer. There just needs to be an affirmative opt-in that is in plain language and gives consent for the browser to give the cookie information. If it's in a mobile app, it still needs to work the same way. So it's the same thing. If it's a data subject that you're trying to get somebody's data from, let's say, whether it's a browser or an app, same issue applies. You need to be able to give them an opportunity to opt in to the data collection. So nothing changes, whether it's an app, browser, same thing.
Great. I think that answers the question. We still have a lot of questions left, but let's keeping the time in mind, we will respond to those questions over email. I would thank Anmol, David, and Sandeep for taking out the time to come here and share their experience with us. Thanks a lot for the attendees for attending this session. We'll come back again soon with another pressing subject and the insight from the world of conversion optimization. Till then, keep optimizing.